So let me answer that question. I mean, money is money. Okay, if there's like X thousands in your bank account, you can be as creative as you like. Okay, but that's the cash that's there, and it's going to be spent or budgeted, spent, etc. But there is a lot of creativity, to your point, when it comes to how you look at cutting costs. And if I could, I'd like to share a couple different other perspectives rather than, gee, 10% sales down, 10% cut across everything. And some of these things, frankly, they're not rocket science. I suspect most leaders are doing these, but I think it's when you look through a different lens, things look like a different color, and sometimes there's an insight you can get. The obvious one is just downgrading your expenses. Whether it be employee health plans and benefit programs. My son works in Silicon Valley, and there was the company decided to cut some of their expenses, and one of the benefits they had was they had a barber come by once every 2 months to give people haircuts. Now, for me, not really an issue, haircuts one way or the other, but guess what? That was a perk that was actually costing a fair amount of money that the company decided this isn't, you know. Same thing with some of the software, for example. When was the last time your organization actually did an audit to say how much of the software that we're paying for every single month, whether it's Office or Google or whatever, that you're actually spending on? Me downgrading your expenses is an important one. Another is to say, okay, so maybe in this case, slicing is a good idea. Let's cut everything by 5% or by 10%. We'll leave certain parts that we don't want to, but slicing is an easy way. Another strategy is what I call amputation. Okay, and amputation is a strategy where we say, okay, well, you know what? We didn't need this hand anyway. We're just going to snip it off and away it goes, and we're going to make do with everything else. And you may say, well, one second, why would I want to amputate? We've spent all this time growing. But what ends up happening, sadly, is sometimes the commitments we make over the years aren't exactly what can I say? Good decisions, right? They're ones where we've grown because we think we need such and such later on, but maybe we don't really need that any on. If you take a look at any particular expense, any particular category, by the way, when I mean, let me give you some specific examples of amputation. Well, you know something? We've expanded our geographic focus to be Canada and the United States. Okay, well, thank you. Is it all the United States? Maybe we're just going to focus on Canada. Okay, or if you're in the United States, you're just going to focus on the United States. Maybe it's you're offering 6 different services, okay, and now you're only going to offer 5 because number 6, there was taking up a lot of resources and it was not the greatest. It wasn't as fully developed, etc. Maybe you'll start that again some other time, but right now we don't need all these services. We're going to take one out. We're going to amputate that particular service. Related one to amputation is this. If you take a look at your organization and you've been there for 5 years, for example, look at the budget from 5 years ago and look at what the organization spent on. And I know inflation, things become more expensive over time, but take a look at what the organization was like 5 years ago and say, listen, is there any way we could rewind some of our expenses and some of our services, some of our deliverables, some of our revenue sources too, maybe back to what it was 5 years ago? And the answer is, well, no, time has sort of moved on. We're a different organization. 5 years is a lot of time between now and then. We've accomplished a lot. But by taking a look at the delta between those and every single one of the expense items and say, well, you know what? Yeah, we've changed, but do we need to spend this? What would it take? And this is one of the wonderful methodologies that we'll use. I call it the what if and how might we kind of approach. What if we rewound this expense to that? Okay, what would that world look like? And then, well, how might we actually make that happen? Because if you're able to make that happen, all of a sudden, maybe you've looked at how to cut that expense or no longer, amputate that sort of business line or that deliverable or whatever in a way that doesn't hurt the overall organization and will just give you enough power to actually go through the cash crunch. Another technique is deferral. I don't think this one's rocket science at all. Do you really, really, really need to spend that money right now? Can it not be deferred until, say, next period? Sometimes the impact will be huge, but sometimes the impact will be very little, particularly if the people who are buying are not buying so much because we're in a recession-proof recession and they don't have the money or themselves. So why are you spending money actually keeping that? Maybe some of the expenses to support whatever it is can be deferred later on. Now, if you take a look at some expenses and your insurance provider says, well, you know what, you should increase the liability coverage from 3 million to 5 million because that's kind of the standard today. And you want to take their advice. You don't want to be caught sort of flat-footed. On the other hand, will it make that much of a difference to defer the decision to move from 3 million to 5 million from now until, say, 3 months or 6 months from now? It may, okay, but it also may not. Um, what if, for example, your agency says, we want to increase the budget. We want to increase your marketing budget. We want to do more promotion, etc. Well, if the cost of, call it, customer acquisition, whether it's members or whatever the sales, if the cost of that is less than the revenue that's going to change, yeah, that will be generated from it, why in the world would you actually defer or cut the marketing cost when in fact that's going to work to grow revenue? Right? So some of the deferral of expenses, if we do it just across the board, is not a good idea. But so anything that generates cash, that I would take a look at a little bit differently. Um, I think that there's another kind of cut that we haven't talked about, which is really more strategic cuts. And strategic cuts are ones where um, where you shift. It's almost kind of like amputation, but where you say, okay, if you've got a certain number of dollars and you've got a whole bunch of different things that you can spend on, what are the ways to um, what's the word I'm looking for? Choose, audition. Okay, each one of these. So the ones that have the best return are the ones where you actually spend the money on. So, for example, do you want to keep on investing in, say, more trade shows, but have fewer people, fewer members of your team attend? Okay. Invest in CRM and CRM training, okay, versus a new accounting system, just as an example, because the CRM might help generate more business. Or invest in downloadable lead magnets if we're talking about digital stuff, as opposed to generic blog posts. Both of them take resources and time, but of all these examples, I'm sure we can think of more of them. Some of them are a little bit more likely to generate cash, and if you shut them down, it'll generate less, which is a problem. Um, I think that the structural changes, we've all felt it, we've all made changes because of COVID. But the whole question of saying, okay, how do we know what structural changes are? What are some of the tools we can use to identify those things and therefore make sure that our investments, expenditures in that area are right size, customer journey mapping. What are all the steps that people go through? How do you collapse that and make it faster? How might you use digital transformation to do this kind of thing? How might divestitures or acquisitions within a particular area affect what's happening in the cash? Is there a way, for example, that you can deliver some of what you're doing via joint ventures and partnerships rather than sort of having the cost of all of that delivery done internally? Is there a way that you can use outsourcing? Okay, to make some of this, and whether it's outsourcing to somebody local or across the pond, it doesn't matter, but must everything be done internally? Or how about the question of contractors versus employees? Okay, and a more flexible workforce, etc. All these things have cash impacts one way or the other, and they're kind of all under that structural change umbrella. How do you move from being a reactive organization to one that's a little bit more proactive and saying, okay, perhaps we can do some of these things. AI, how might AI collapse some of your workflows so that perhaps they can be done faster or far less cheaply, far more cheaply, I should say. So there's a whole bunch of other ones, but those are the different types of lenses I think that many organizations are not thinking through, just because it's really more of a, well, cut 10% on the top. We got to cut 10% on all the expense categories. And I just don't think I think we could do better than
Okay, lots of options. I hope everyone's taking notes.
that. We've got the recording, folks.
Got the
So
recording, sure.